Ella had always been a cheerful child, growing up in a loving family in a small but bustling African city. Her father, Obina, was a respected businessman, while her mother, Amara, was a teacher. Together, they provided a happy and stable home for Ella and her younger brother. Life was perfect, until the Carl family came into the picture. One fateful evening, Obina was confronted by members of the Carl family, a wealthy and influential clan known for their connections to political power. Accused of a breach in business dealings, Obina refused to yield to their demands, determined to protect his company's integrity. But the Carl family didn't take kindly to his defiance. Right in front of his wife and children, Obina was brutally beaten to death. Ella was just 15 years old, but the horrifying image of her father's lifeless body was seared into her memory. As she clung to her sobbing mother, she swore to herself that she would avenge him. After Obina's death, Ella's family was thrown into turmoil. They lost their home, their livelihood, and any semblance of security. The Carl family, with the backing of a ruthless politician named Chief Adi, ensured that no one dared to help them. Only one man was brave enough to stand by them, Pong, a kind-hearted lawyer with a strong sense of justice. "I'll do everything I can to get justice for your father," Pong assured Ella one day. His determination gave her a glimmer of hope, but the lawsuit he filed against the Carl family was doomed from the start. The court, swayed by the Carl's influence, dismissed the case. Pong lost his job for even attempting to challenge them. "Ella," Pong said quietly after the final hearing, "you can't stay here. They'll come after you and your family. You need to leave." That evening, at the airport, Pong handed Ella a forged passport with a new name, Ella Chisholm, and enough money to survive abroad. As she boarded the plane, Ella glanced at the airport screens, where news of Chief Adi's latest political success played. The same sinister smile that had haunted her dreams appeared on the screen. She clenched her fists, vowing silently, "I'll be back. And I'll destroy you all." 13 years passed. Pong, now a member of parliament, received a package at his office. Inside was a thick stack of $100 bills and a handwritten note. "Uncle Pong, it's time." Ella. Pong's hands trembled as he read the note. He knew what it meant. The girl he had helped all those years ago had returned, and she was ready to reclaim what she had lost. In a quiet neighborhood, Ella parked her sleek black car outside a kindergarten. Her daughter, Neka, was starting school, and Ella wanted everything to be perfect. As she adjusted Neka's hair, other parents murmured nearby, annoyed about the heavy security presence. "What's all this about?" Ella asked another mother. "They say a big political figure is visiting today. Looks like they don't care about us ordinary folk," the woman replied bitterly. Ella stepped out of the car to investigate, only to freeze when she saw him. Chief Adi, the man responsible for her father's death, was standing in the school courtyard. He hadn't aged much. His calculating smile was as sharp as ever. Ella's heart raced, her palms sweating. She pressed her nails into her hand to ground herself. In the crowd, her eyes caught another familiar face, Chijioke, Chief Adi's son-in-law. The gazes met for a brief moment before he looked away. Ella's lips curled into a faint smile. "This is my way in," she thought. Ella knew she couldn't confront the Carl family directly. They were too powerful. But if she could win Chijioke's trust, she might gain access to the secrets that could bring him down. Later that evening, she attended a charity gala where she knew Chijioke would be present. Dressed in an elegant red gown, she moved gracefully through the room until their paths crossed. "Mr. Chijioke," she said with a charming smile, extending her hand, "I'm Ella Chisholm. I've heard a lot about you." He looked at her, intrigued. "The pleasure is mine, Miss Chisholm. Are you new to the city?" "You could say that," she replied cryptically. "But I'm here to stay." Their conversation was brief, but Ella had planted the seed. She knew the game she was about to play would be dangerous, but she was prepared. 13 years of silent suffering had transformed her into a woman with nothing to lose. As she left the gala, Ella looked up at the starlit sky and whispered, "Papa, I promise. They'll pay for what they did to you." Ella stood backstage at the kindergarten's opening ceremony, adjusting the sparkling yellow dress she had chosen for her performance. It was a deliberate choice, one designed to capture attention, not just any attention, but his. The hall was alive with the murmurs of parents and dignitaries, but Ella was focused. This was her stage, the beginning of a carefully laid plan that had taken years to prepare. In the audience sat Chijioke, the son-in-law of her greatest enemy, Chief Adi. Beside him was his wife, Sade, whose presence he barely acknowledged anymore. Ella stepped into the spotlight as the music began, her movements graceful and magnetic. She could feel the weight of every gaze, but it was Chijioke's that mattered most. His eyes followed her every move, captivated. As Ella twirled, their eyes met briefly. Her expression was playful, her gaze lingering just long enough to plant the seed of intrigue. Behind him, murmurs of admiration filled the room. "She's stunning," one woman whispered. "She has such an elegant figure," said another. Chijioke shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Sade, who was engrossed in her phone. He clenched his fists, trying to suppress the growing desire sparked by Ella's performance. When the dance ended, applause erupted, but Chijioke remained frozen, his heart racing. Ella slipped out of the hall and into the cool night air. The courtyard was lit by strings of golden lights, casting a soft glow over the gathering. As she walked past Chijioke, who had stepped outside to clear his head, she allowed her bracelet to slide off her wrist and fall to the ground. Chijioke noticed immediately. "Excuse me, miss, you dropped something," he called, picking it up. Ella turned, her eyes sparkling under the lights. "Oh, thank you," she said with a soft smile, her voice laced with charm. Chijioke hesitated, his words catching in his throat. Before he could speak, Ella's attention seemed to drift, and she walked away, leaving him standing there with her bracelet in hand. Unable to resist, he followed her to the dressing room. When he opened the door, however, his breath caught. Ella was in an intimate embrace with another man, laughing softly as though she hadn't just performed on stage minutes ago. Chijioke quickly shut the door, his heart pounding. "What's wrong with me?" he thought, shaking his head. He didn't know this woman, but she had stirred something in him that he couldn't ignore. The next morning, the kindergarten held a parent-teacher meeting. Ella arrived early with her daughter, Ada, ensuring she looked effortlessly poised. She had already set the stage for another confrontation. As parents settled in, Ella deliberately placed Sade's daughter's backpack under the feet of Demeter, a notoriously sharp-tongued woman who was known for her public feuds. When Demeter noticed the bag, she picked it up and rummaged through it, her expression turning sour as she pulled out a baby diaper. "Whose bag is this?" Demeter demanded, holding it up for all to see. Sade stiffened. "It's my daughter's," she admitted reluctantly. "A diaper, really?" Demeter sneered. "Do you not know how to raise your child? Or are you just too busy spending your husband's money?" Laughter rippled through the room, and Sade's face turned red with humiliation. Ella stood to the side, watching the chaos unfold with a barely concealed smirk. Just then, Ada, Ella's daughter, noticed a boy laughing at her friend and marched over to him. "Stop laughing," she shouted, scratching his face before anyone could stop her. The boy wailed in pain, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. The commotion brought Ella's bodyguards rushing in, their imposing presence escalating the tension. Demeter, however, wasn't one to back down. "Who do you think you are, barging in here like this?" she snapped. Ella finally stepped forward, her expression calm and collected. "I apologize for the disturbance," she said smoothly. "Children will be children, but perhaps we should all remember that we're here for their benefit, not to air personal grievances." Her words were measured, but the pointed look she gave Sade wasn't lost on anyone. Sade fumed silently, her humiliation complete. Later that evening, Ella attended a cocktail party hosted by the school. She moved through the crowd with effortless grace, her presence commanding attention. When she spotted Chijioke by the bar, she approached him with a casual smile. "Mr. Chijioke," she said, her voice like honey, "it seems we keep running into each other." He turned, startled. "Miss Ella," she supplied, holding out her hand. He took it, his grip lingering. "Ella, you were incredible last night." "Thank you," she replied, her tone light. As she reached for her drink, her fingers brushed against his, sending a jolt through him. Ella's expression remained indifferent, but inside, she knew she had him. Chijioke was already ensnared, and she hadn't even begun her real game. Underneath her composed exterior, Ella's mind raced with thoughts of revenge. Every move, every word, every glance was part of her plan to dismantle the Carl family from the inside out. This was just the beginning. The argument between Demeter and Sade had escalated just as Ella had planned. Both women refused to back down, each demanding the other take responsibility for the chaos. Demeter, furious over the incident with her son, demanded that Sade's daughter be expelled from the kindergarten. Sade, equally enraged, insisted that Demeter apologize for her public insults. The principal, caught in the middle, was at her wit's end. She couldn't afford to offend either of the influential families. Ella, standing calmly to the side, seized the opportunity. "Ladies," Ella said smoothly, her voice cutting through the tension. "Perhaps there's a better way to resolve this. Why don't we involve Sade's husband in the discussion? He's a reasonable man, isn't he?" Demeter smirked, folding her arms. "Let's see if he'll defend his wife after hearing what happened." Sade frowned but couldn't refuse the suggestion. Moments later, Chijioke arrived at the kindergarten. His gaze immediately landed on Ella, and his face betrayed a flicker of emotion, an unspoken memory of the scene he had accidentally witnessed at the opening ceremony. Ella greeted him with a polite smile, acting as if nothing had ever happened. Chijioke, distracted by her presence, nodded mindlessly when asked to apologize to Demeter, barely registering the request. Afterward, as the situation calmed, Ella and Chijioke lingered to discuss their children's education. Later that evening, Chijioke made an unusual decision. He personally picked up his daughter from school. Sade, who rarely concerned herself with these matters, didn't even notice. His real reason, of course, was to return the bracelet Ella had dropped at the party. When Ella saw him at her gate, she feigned surprise. "Oh, Mr. Chijioke," she exclaimed, stepping out to greet him. "You didn't have to go through the trouble." "It's no trouble," he replied, holding out the bracelet. Ella's expression softened, and she looked at it with reverence. "This bracelet belonged to my late father. Thank you for returning it. It means so much to me." As she attempted to put it on, her fingers trembled, and the bracelet slipped from her grasp. "Oh no," she murmured, trying again and failing. Chijioke, unable to watch her struggle, stepped forward. "Here, let me help," he offered. Their hands brushed as he secured the bracelet on her wrist. The brief contact sent a jolt through him. Ella kept her expression calm, but inwardly, she knew she had him exactly where she wanted. Chijioke cleared his throat, trying to dispel the memory of her performance, the way she had moved under the lights, the imagined scent of her perfume. "I should be going now," he muttered. "Of course," Ella said with a warm smile. "Thank you again, Mr. Chijioke." When Chijioke returned home, Sade was waiting in the living room. "You picked up our daughter today?" she asked, her tone sharp with suspicion. "Yes," Chijioke replied curtly, sitting down to remove his shoes. "Why, isn't that what we pay the secretary for?" Chijioke's frustration boiled over. "Maybe because I actually care about being there for my daughter. You're never around when she needs you." Sade's face fell, guilt flickering in her eyes. Without another word, she stood and went to their daughter's room, tucking her in for the night and soothing her with quiet lullabies, a rare gesture for the typically aloof mother. Meanwhile, Chijioke poured himself a glass of wine in the study, his thoughts once again drifting to Ella. He couldn't shake the image of her smile, the warmth in her eyes, or the way her voice lingered in his mind. In the shadows of his luxurious home, Chijioke's mind churned. He didn't know it yet, but he was walking straight into Ella's carefully laid trap. A trap designed not just to ensnare him, but to dismantle everything his family stood for. Ella, meanwhile, sat on her balcony under the starlit sky, sipping tea and gazing at the city lights. She thought of Chijioke's distracted expression, the hesitation in his voice, and the growing tension between him and his wife. Everything was unfolding exactly as she had planned. The game had just begun, and Ella was determined to win. "This is only the start, Papa," she whispered to the night. "I'll make them all pay." Ella had played her cards well. At the kindergarten, Chijioke had lingered behind after picking up his daughter. While the bodyguard helped the little girl into the car, Chijioke stayed back, eager for another conversation with Ella. Ella, ever so poised, invited him into a small room that served as the teacher's lounge. On the table was an old organ, its polished keys gleaming under the light. "You play?" Chijioke asked, his curiosity piqued. Ella smiled faintly, brushing her fingers over the keys. "I learned a little while abroad. Would you like to hear something?" He nodded, settling into a chair as Ella began to play. The melody filled the room, slow and haunting. Chijioke closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. When he opened them again, Ella was standing in front of him, her hand extended. "Dance with me," she said softly. Chijioke hesitated, then took her hand. Ella led him gracefully, the two moving in rhythm with the music. "This song," she said, her voice low, "is called The Forgotten Memory. It tells the story of a beggar who once wore the robes of an emperor. After a head injury, he lost his memory and spent the rest of his life believing he was royalty. It's a reminder for us to forget who we think we are, and rediscover our true desires." The intimacy of her words and the closeness of the dance made Chijioke forget himself entirely. For those brief moments, he wasn't a wealthy tycoon tied to family obligations. He felt like a young artist discovering the thrill of love for the first time. When Chijioke returned home, he was restless. Sade lay beside him in bed, talking about her plans for the week, but he barely heard her. His mind was consumed with thoughts of Ella, her music, her touch, the look in her eyes as they danced. Meanwhile, in a dark, concealed room, Ella stood before a wall covered in photographs. Surveillance equipment hummed quietly in the background. The photographs chronicled her targets, each one marked with notes and connections. In the center was Chijioke's picture, now marked with a bold red line. Ella stared at it with satisfaction. "He's in my hands now," she thought, removing his picture from the wall. Her plan was moving perfectly. The next morning, Sade confided in her bodyguard, a stoic man who had worked for her family for years. "Last night," she said, a rare smile gracing her lips, "Chijioke and I reconnected. After so many years, he finally touched me again. I've waited so long for this moment." The bodyguard listened without emotion, nodding as she spoke. Sade, emboldened by her husband's apparent return of affection, began making changes. She dismissed several of her longtime staff, including the bodyguard, calling them unnecessary, now that things were improving at home. But her newfound happiness was short-lived. Dissatisfied with herself, she decided to seek cosmetic enhancements to reclaim her youth and ensure Chijioke stayed by her side. She instructed her secretary to book appointments at a cosmetic surgery clinic and arrange a consultation at a gynecologist's office, she added vaguely. The secretary, flustered by her demands, misunderstood and scheduled a regular medical appointment instead. When Sade realized the error, she flew into a rage. "I didn't ask for a routine checkup," she snapped. "I want enhancement surgery. How hard is that to understand?" The secretary stammered apologies and quickly made the arrangements. A week later, Sade returned home transformed. Nearly 50 years old, she now carried herself with the confidence of a woman half her age. Her skin glowed, her figure seemed more defined, and her demeanor was commanding. But despite her outward changes, Sade couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. Chijioke's distant gaze and distracted responses lingered in her mind. Little did she know, the man she was trying to hold onto was already caught in Ella's web. Ella prepared for the next phase of her plan. She wasn't simply dismantling Chijioke's life. She was unraveling the very fabric of his family. Every step was calculated, every move deliberate. As she looked at the remaining pictures on her wall, she whispered to herself, one by one, they'll fall. Her revenge wasn't just personal. It was a masterpiece in the making. Ella stepped into the dimly lit reading room wearing a sleek nightgown, her confidence unwavering. She had instructed the nanny to prepare every detail for the evening, but as she approached Chijioke, she could see the unease in his eyes. He sat stiffly, a glass of wine in his hand, and stared blankly at the book in front of him. The soft romantic music playing in the background felt out of place in the tense atmosphere. Ella leaned closer, her voice low and inviting. Chijioke, she said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, why don't we shower and head to bed? It's been a long day. Chijioke froze for a moment before shaking his head subtly. I'm not feeling up to it, he mumbled. But the truth was written all over his face. He had no desire to be with her. Their last intimacy had only been possible because he imagined her as someone else. Someone who haunted his thoughts day and night. Ella, frustrated but unwilling to press further, left him in the room. Alone, Chijioke poured himself another drink and turned on the television. The screen lit up with a video of Ella, her seductive dance from the party playing again. He leaned back in his chair, torn between guilt and desire. After battling his thoughts for hours, Chijioke picked up his phone and dialed Ella's number. Ella, he said when she answered, would you come to our family villa this weekend? We're having a small party. Ella's lips curled into a smile on the other end of the line. She had been waiting for this moment. I'd be on, but this wasn't just about seduction. As she pinned Chijioke's photograph back onto her wall, surrounded by notes and connections, her expression hardened. This is for my father, she murmured to herself. And for every piece of my life they destroyed. Her plan was far from over. Ella's chest tightened as she re-entered the party, the sight of her father's murderer stirring memories she had fought hard to bury. 13 years ago, she had watched helplessly as her father was beaten to death, his cries for mercy echoing in her mind even now. She forced a smile, her mask of composure in place, but the laughter and champagne of the gathering suddenly felt suffocating. Excuse me, she said to no one in particular, slipping away to the rooftop. Under the pale moonlight, Ella gripped a wooden plank she found nearby and pressed it against her skin, the pain anchoring her as her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Stay focused, Ella. You can't let them win." Unbeknownst to her, Chijioke had followed. His quiet footsteps startled her, and she spun around, hurriedly covering the bloodstains on her dress with trembling hands. "What are you doing?" he asked, his deep voice filled with concern. I was trimming a loose thread on my dress," Ella stammered, forcing a shaky laugh. "I accidentally hurt myself. Clumsy, I know." Chijioke stepped closer, his sharp eyes scanning her. "You're lying," he said softly but firmly. Ella tried to brush past him, but he caught her arm, his grip gentle yet unyielding. "Let me help you," he said. Without waiting for her protest, Chijioke guided her to a small, unused room nearby. He found a first aid kit and knelt before her, carefully lifting the hem of her dress. What he saw made his heart sink. Her legs bore scars, both fresh and old, a patchwork of pain that told a story far darker than she had admitted. "Ella," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "who hurt you?" She looked away, her walls rising again. "Don't analyze me, Chijioke," she said coldly. "You don't like it when others analyze you, so don't do it to me." But her voice wavered, and Chijioke caught the vulnerability hidden beneath. He gently cleaned her wounds, his movements tender, his silence speaking volumes. "You said tango brings healing," he said after a long pause, meeting her gaze. Maybe you're the one who needs it most. For a moment, Ella's mask slipped, and she stared at him, caught off guard by his kindness. A small, inexplicable warmth bloomed in her chest, but she quickly squashed it. I need to go, she said abruptly, pulling her dress down and standing. Ella, Chijioke called after her, his tone imploring, why do you have so many scars? What are you hiding? She stopped at the door but didn't turn back. Some things are better left buried, she said before walking away. When Ella returned home, her husband, Jide, was waiting for her. You're late, he remarked, his tone indifferent. Did something happen? No, she said curtly, brushing past him. Jide reached for her, but she pulled away, her body stiff with anger and pain. I'm tired, she said flatly. Good night. Once alone in her room, Ella sat on the edge of her bed, the weight of her memories pressing down on her. 13 years ago, Jide had been one of the men who had helped orchestrate her father's death. She had married him not for love but as a calculated step in her quest for revenge. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms as she recalled the night her father died. His cries, the laughter of his murderers, and the helplessness she felt had never left her. The following day, Ella visited a music store to purchase a rare accordion. She had learned that it was Chijioke's favorite instrument and planned to use it to further her plan to win his trust, and ultimately his heart. I'd like to buy this, she told the shopkeeper, pointing to the sleek, intricately designed accordion. The shopkeeper hesitated. I'm sorry, ma'am, but this has already been reserved. Ella's smile faltered. By who? The richest man in the region, Mr. Chijioke, the shopkeeper replied. Ella's stomach churned. Of course, he had already claimed it. Her plan would have to take another turn. As she left the store, Ella's resolve hardened. She would find another way to outmaneuver him, and everyone else standing in her way. Back at home, Ella stood before the wall in her secret room, adorned with photos and notes. She reached for Chijioke's picture, her fingers brushing against it. You may not trust me yet, she murmured, but I'll make sure you're on my side when the time comes. And when I'm done, every single one of them will pay. Her eyes burned with determination as she pinned the photo back on the wall. The game was far from over. Ella's steps were brisk as she left the music store, her mind racing. She had feigned nonchalance when Chijioke appeared, but her heart hammered in her chest. She had not anticipated him being there. As she stepped onto the street, she heard his voice call after her. Ella, wait. Chijioke's tone was calm, but his pace quickened as he caught up with her. Turning, Ella gave him a polite smile. Yes, Mr. Chijioke, why were you interested in that accordion? He asked, his gaze sharp, searching. Ella hesitated, her mind scrambling for an excuse. I enjoy music, she said with a shrug. I thought it might be a nice addition to my collection. Chijioke's eyes narrowed slightly. That particular accordion isn't just any instrument. What's your real reason? Feeling cornered, Ella stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. Must you overthink everything? She asked, her lips curling into a sly smile. Before he could respond, she leaned in and kissed him, a bold, calculated move. Chijioke froze, his breath catching as the kiss ended as quickly as it began. Ella stepped back, her expression calm. Stop worrying about trivial things, she said softly. Let's just be honest with each other. Later that week, Ella found herself at Chijioke's home. She had offered to take his daughter, Ada, home after school, feigning kindness. While Ada played with her nanny, Ella wandered the house. Her steps led her to Chijioke's study, where she noticed a slightly ajar door at the corner of the room. Curiosity sparked, and she slipped inside, her breath catching as she took in the hidden room. Shelves lined with gold bars, bundles of cash, and stacks of documents filled the space. But Ella's focus was on something else. She sifted through the papers, her pulse quickening as she found lists of bribes and transactions. Then, her fingers brushed against an old newspaper. As she scanned it, her heart stopped. The article detailed the tragic car accident that had killed Chijioke's mother years ago. Ella's hands trembled as she pieced together the truth. Chijioke's mother had been framed, used and discarded by the wealthy family she worked for. The accident had not been a coincidence. Ella, Chijioke's voice startled her. Panicked, she shoved the documents back and hurried to close the hidden door. It creaked painfully slowly, but she managed to secure it just as he entered the room. "What are you doing here?" Chijioke asked, his eyes narrowing as he noticed her flushed face. Ella forced a smile. "I got lost while looking for the restroom," she said lightly. Chijioke's gaze lingered on her for a moment before he nodded. "You should leave," he said, his voice cool. Ella drove home in silence, her mind racing. The image of the newspaper article haunted her. She pulled over, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Chijioke's tragic past mirrored her own, and for a brief moment, she felt a pang of sympathy. "No," she muttered to herself. "Focus. This isn't the time to be soft." Meanwhile, back at his study, Chijioke stood in the hidden room. His eyes scanned the shelves until they landed on the disturbed pile of newspapers. Someone had been here. His jaw tightened as he flipped through the pages, stopping at the article about his mother. "Ella," he murmured under his breath. That evening, Ella sat on her bed, replaying the day's events. Her heart was heavy with conflicting emotions. Her mission for revenge was clear, yet the more she learned about Chijioke, the harder it became to see him as her enemy. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her door. It was Jide, her husband. "You've been quiet," he said, his tone suspicious. "I'm tired, Jide," she replied curtly. "Leave me alone." Jide hesitated but eventually left. As the door closed, Ella's resolve hardened. She reached for the photograph of her father on her bedside table. "This isn't over," she whispered. "They'll all pay for what they did," Chijioke included. In another part of the city, Chijioke stared at the article in his hands, his mind swirling with questions. If Ella knew his secret, what was she planning to do with it? Hello, amazing viewers, do you want to find out what happened next on this story? Comment below and share your thoughts. Kindly subscribe if you have so you don't miss out on the next part of the story. Please share with your friends and loved ones. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Thank you and see you on the next one. Bye.